What's up everyone, welcome back. Now that we've been able to set up our authentication and also set up authorization for the different endpoints, we're going to be establishing relationships across the different entities that are within our application. For now we only have users and books, but we can pretty much add any other database tables and other different modules. So we're going to be looking at how we can do that in this video. We're also going to be looking at how we can use our Pydantic to serialize data in these relationships and how we can return them on our API endpoints. So to begin, we have our users table, which basically has all its attributes, just like you see right here. We also have the books table, which has its attributes, just like you see right here. But we want to achieve an application where users will be able to submit books, and those books that are submitted by them will be tracked back to them. So that means that there's going to be a relationship between users and the books they submit to our application. So if we go to the next diagram right here, we can see that we are going to establish a relationship between our users table and our books table. And simply what we're going to do is to establish a foreign key on our books, and that is going to be related to our user UID. So once we've been able to do that, then we shall go ahead and also look at how we can modify our structure of our API endpoints or our responses so that we can return data containing these various relationships. So the first thing we're going to do is to add a relationship between our books and our users. And the way we're going to achieve that is by adding a foreign key that is going to be relating our books table to our users table. To do that, we're going to simply define the foreign key as our user UID. Now this user UID is going to be an optional field because it's going to be a nullable field anyway. So we have to import the optional class from typing. So I'll just come right here at the top and say from typing shall import the optional class. Once that is imported, we shall now come and say that this is going to be an optional, but it's going to be the type of the UUID. So we're going to say UUID.UUID. Once that is done, then we're going to define what this field is going to be. So we shall just use our field function, and inside here we shall simply provide the default for this field, which is going to be none. And then we can also go ahead and to this we can point to that table or the column that we want to make the foreign key. So this is going to be a foreign key, but it's going to reference the UID of our users table. So for us to do that, we shall have to look at our user model, which created in our auth directory. This has the table name being user, so that's what we have to use. And then the field name that we want to set as our primary key is going to be the UUID. So this is going to be a foreign key that's going to be referencing. So for us to name it the foreign key, we have to use the foreign key attribute or argument. And in this case, we have to provide the name of the table, which is users dot the field that we want to point to or reference, which is going to be our UID. So once this is done, we're now going to go ahead and make this reflect in our database using Alembic. So we set up Alembic in the previous videos, and if you haven't checked them out, please go ahead and look at how we set up Alembic. So to begin, what I'm going to do is to create a revision for this migration. I'll close some of the stuff I have here and open up a fresh terminal. Inside here, I'm going to create a revision, which is simply going to be a change or a tracking of the change that we've done. So in our case, we shall just come and say Alembic revision, and we shall auto-generate this. So after auto-generating it, we're now going to go ahead and create a message to mark it as a revision. So this message is going to be, let's just say relate users to books. And once this is done, our migration or our revision is going to be created. Now, if I go within our versions directory and look at this revision, we shall see that a new column has been added to the books table, just like you see right here. And that is going to be a nullable field, just like you see right here. Now, we also see that a foreign key has been created, and that foreign key is going to be having none. So it's going to be created on our books table, and it's going to relate the users table using the user UID. But this is going to also reference the UID field on our user table. So that has been our revision. Once that is done, now the next thing we can do is to simply go ahead and look at how we can relate a user to the book they've submitted every time they create a book. Now we shall go within our user routes or our book routes, because that's where we went ahead and created books. And inside there, we shall visit the endpoint that's necessary for creating a book. Now, one thing you can notice is that in the previous videos, we call these user details, which is kind of misleading because what is returned out of this dependency is going to be the token details. So what I'm going to do is to simply go ahead and rename all these so that they can have token details instead of user details, because that's what they return. Another thing I will do is to also be specific about the type of the user details. I'm going to highlight every occurrence of this by pressing Ctrl Shift and L, and then I'll begin modifying them. So instead of user details, we are going to have token details, and also we shall provide the type, which is going to be our dictionary. So we expect that this is going to return a dictionary, and that dictionary is going to have our token details. Now, once we've got our token details, the next thing is going to be for us to get the user UID out of those token details. Now, remember, when we were creating the utilities to create our tokens, we basically went ahead and provided our user data. But when you see where we create the token pair, that's within our routes for authentication, we went ahead and provided our user UID inside our user data. So for us to go ahead and access our user UID, what we're going to do is to say our user UID is going to be got from, in our case, our token details. And since this is a dictionary, you can use the .get method. And this .get method is going to allow us access the key, which in our case is going to be the user. But this is also going to be a dictionary containing the user UID. So we're going to access that as well. Once that is done, then let's go ahead and modify this create book service method that can allow us to create a book. And what we're going to do is to simply make sure that it creates a book, but also assigns the user ID as the user UID or the currently logged in user who has made that request. So we're going to go back to create book, and we're going to modify it by simply providing the user UID and using that UID parameter to go ahead and simply fill that new column, which is our user UID. So I'll just come right in here, and for our create our book, after providing our book data, we shall also provide our user UID, and this is going to be a string. And once we provided our user UID, we are going to also go ahead and modify our book object so that instead of having none, we can have a user UID. So we shall say new book.user UID, and for our case, it's going to be user UID. So this is just enough for us to use this method to create a book with the user UID we've provided. So we shall go back to our routes, and what we're going to do is to simply come right in here. So after providing our book data, shall now make use of this newly got user UID. So I'll just come right here and say that this is going to be our user ID. So our user ID or our user UID is going to have the value of this user UID. So I'll go ahead and format that. So once I've been able to achieve that, then let's go ahead and try to create a new book using the currently logged in user. So I head over back to RESTFox, and I'm going to go to where I will create a new book. Now, if I try to just simply use the JSON that I have right here to create a new book, we now see that we have an error. If I go back to our terminal right here, our server is saying that, so our server right here is saying that the column user UID of relation book does not exist. So let's go ahead and see why this is not working. I think we did not run the migration, so we have to go ahead and apply this. So for us to apply this, we have to run Alembic upgrade. Sorry, I forgot to run this. So when you run Alembic upgrade head, then this will go ahead and make those changes reflect in our database. And when we do that, if we go back to our RESTbox right here and try to create a new book, we shall see that it has been created. So if we try to retrieve the user ID or try to get this book, so let me try to do that inside our Postgres. So I've of late found out this tool that can allow us to check for our connection to Postgres as well as to navigate the data, run SQL statements, and that is called SQLALCHEMY. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Once I've opened it up, it just has this simple minimalistic user interface, and I can just simply connect to our database. And right here, we see our database that we created for our books. So to access our tables, we're going to go to tables, and then inside tables, we shall go to public. And inside public, we shall see public.users, public.books. But what we're interested in is public.books. If I open that, then we shall see our newly created book, which is this one. But in this case, it has our user UID added to it. You also see that for the existing data that did not have a user UID, now has been set to the default value of those fields. So let's go ahead and try to make sure that we get the currently logged in users books. So to do that, we can just simply go to our book endpoints and create a new API endpoint for getting all books by a user. So I'm simply going to get rid of this undefined squiggly line by removing this print statement. And then this is going to be similar to what we have here, except that we shall be able to provide the user UID. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'll paste it right here. And then instead of being on the /books root endpoint, in our case, we shall have /books/user. And then we shall provide the user UID. So I'll say /user UID. Once we have that, then I'll go ahead and also modify the name of our get all books path handler. Instead of being get all books, in this case, we shall say get user book submissions to be more specific. And so this is going to be submission. So get the books that a certain user has submitted within our application. And then this is also going to require us to have the user UID. So if I go right here, I can simply go ahead and say that our user UID is going to be a string. And once we've done that, then we're simply going to come down here. So once we have that token details, we can also get the user ID from there, but we want to make it dynamic so that you can provide the UID of the user, you can provide the UID of the currently logged in user, and still be able to get the books for that currently logged in user. So instead of using this book service to get all books method, we're now going to make use of get user books method, or if that's what we've called it. So you have to go ahead and actually define it. So I'll say get user books, and this will take in the session, but it also take in the user UID, just like you see right here. So keep in mind that this doesn't exist, so we have to go ahead and define it. After I've defined this, I'll have to go back to our service where we basically went ahead and got all our got all books from our database. We shall create a new method that's going to be responsible for getting books by user. Now this is going to be very similar to the one that we have here, but it's going to contain some filtering. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy what we had as get all books, and then instead of get all books, I rename it to what we called it. So this is going to be get user books, what I called it here. So I'll copy this, and then I'll simply provide it as the name of this method. So instead of get all books, we shall see get user books. Another thing we're going to provide is going to be the user UID. So I have to provide it as well. I'll say that this will take in our user UID, which is going to be a string, and then the session object, just like you see right here. So we now see that this select statement is only getting all books and then ordering them by the descending book created. So we're going to add a filter. So I'll say dot where, and for our case, this is going to be ordered by the descending created at date, but we're going to filter by the book user UID. So shall say book.user UID is equal to the user UID provided. So this will go ahead and fetch all books, but it will filter using the provided user UID, just like you see right here. So I'm going to go ahead and format that and save. Then head over back to our routes right here, so we can now handle getting all books by a certain user. We can also go ahead and get books for the currently logged in user by simply using the token details user ID, and then we can simply go ahead and do that. But we're going to look at how we can do it in a more interesting way using relationship attributes. So I'm going to go ahead and save, and to test this endpoint, what we're going to do is to get to our RESTful right here. We shall create a new request. So this is going to be get books for user, and in this case we shall create. So I'll add a new, or I'll just simply provide the URL right here. So it's going to be very similar to the one for getting all books. And let me try to close what I have of some of the open API endpoints or requests. So I'll just simply come and say get books for user. I'll provide that URL, but in this case, it's going to be /user and then / the user ID. So we have to get that. Assuming our currently logged in user is this, so I want to get all books that were added by this currently logged in user. I'll copy their ID and then I'll provide it in our URL. So when I send, we see that we are not authenticated, and therefore I have to get the token. I'll simply come right here and copy this token that we have. I'll go within our headers. I'll add our authorization header, and then its value is going to be bearer and then token. When I send, we now see that we can retrieve the books that belong to a certain user. So we are now currently using basic relationships, and we're going to be looking at relationship attributes, which basically allows us to use a more object-oriented way to achieve the same thing without having to directly use the IDs. Now that we've been able to set up this relationship between our books and our users, let us go ahead and look at how relationship attributes can make it easy for us to access them using reverse relationships. So you're wondering what a reverse relationship is. It's simply a way that we can access the user who created a certain book, as well as there we can access the books that belong to a certain user in our case. So to begin, we are going to create an attribute or a field on this book class, and that's going to be the user field. So this user field is going to be an optional field. But what this is going to allow us to do is to access the user whose user ID we have stored in here, but we're going to access that via the relationship. So in our case, we're going to get access to this user model. Shall come at the top right here and say from. So in our case, from our auth dot, in this case, we shall import our models. So to do that, we shall just come and say source.auth. We are going to go ahead and import our models. And once we've gone ahead and done that, then we're simply going to provide our models.user. And what this will do is to define the field that's going to simply allow us to access the user who added this book or who submitted this book. So we're going to be making use of the relationship function, which is one to just help us use relationships to get those objects that are related to a certain object, such as the book object right here. So we shall go ahead and import that. We shall say from SQLModel, we shall import our relationship function, and then we can say that our relationship in this case is going to be to the user table, but we need to specify how. We shall simply return all books that are related to this user. So in this case, this user right here is going to have backpopulates, which is going to be books. So that means that on our user side, we shall access all books that are related to this user. And on our book side, we shall just have to access the user who added that book, but we shall access him via book.user. So from the user side, we are going to have something like user.books, and that is what backportplates is all about. So when you go to our user model, we're going to have something similar to this. I'll go to our models in our auth folder, and then instead of having users, we are simply going to have this being our books. And then we shall do the opposite. So instead of saying books, this is going to be user, just like we defined in our book class. Then let us go ahead and import this too. So I'll go at the top right here and say from, in this case, it's going to be typing. We're going to go ahead and access the optional field, or this is actually going to be the list, because we expect that we're going to get a list of books from the user object. So I'll just come and import list. And once we are able to do that, then we shall also import the relationship function, just like that. Then I'll have to change this from an optional user object to a list of books that are related to this user. So in this case, we are going to also change this from models.user to models.book, and then we shall have to import the models module. So I'll come at the top right here and say from, in this case, source.books, we are going to import our models. Once this is done, another thing we're going to do is to basically describe how SQLModel or SQLALCHEMY is going to load this list of books. Now, SQLModel by default uses lazy loading, but it can be problematic in some ways, most especially when you're dealing with an AsyncDB API. So what we're going to do is to come right here and use another way of loading. So I'll just come right here and say SQLALCHEMY or SA, in this case, relationship keyword arguments. Then we shall specify that we're going to lazily load this, but we are going to provide select in. Now leave a link to this documentation that's going to allow you to understand this in case I've not explained it well. But what this is going to do is to simply allow us to access the books that a user will have submitted. And this is just the relationship attribute. So once you've been able to define this, then let's go ahead and make use of this relationship attribute. So just like we've been able to describe it here, we're now going to go on our schemas of our user and then add that list of books. So we have our user model, and this is going to return that. But in case we want to modify this so that it returns our list of books with the user model, we can simply define that here on our schema by saying books, and then we can use the typing list class. Can just come right here and say from typing, we are going to go ahead and import the list class. And once we've been able to do that, we shall just come and say list, and this will be a list of books. So we're going to import that at the top right here. We shall just come and import the model that we want to go ahead and use to display books. So I can come and say from source.books, we can go ahead and import our book. So I can get the book. This is actually going to be from our schema. So when we say from source.books.schemas, we can import our book. So you have the book create model. Let us make use of the book create model so that we get less fields. Now, once I've been able to do that, I can simply go ahead and provide this as our book create model. And once we've done that, then let us make use of this within our route for retrieving the currently logged in user. So we shall go to our routes, and those are going to be our auth routes. And within our auth routes, we have the path or the endpoint for returning the currently logged in user. What it does is to simply use our token, get the user, and then simply return that user. So once we've been able to do that, we can simply go ahead and provide the response model. And this response model is going to be the schema that we defined in here, or the pedantic model for the user model. So I can just say that we shall make use of our user model to return that specific user with their related books. So I'll go within our routes, or within our RESTFox. To test that, I'll go within our RESTFox, and when you try to get the current user, in this case, we are going to get an error. So let's see where this error is coming from. So we see that our book's published date is going to be a string, but that is going to be a datetime. I think we shouldn't use that book model we imported, but rather let's just use the book model. So I'm going to go ahead and import that book model instead of the book create model, because I just needed less fields. So I guess when you use book and then come and substitute this with book, in our case, if we go back to RESTFox, we shall see that the currently logged in user is returned with the books that are related to them. So that's just how we can handle basic relationships and allow our API endpoints to return data that is related. In this video, we've looked at how we can set up relationships between related entities within our application. We've also looked at how we can use SQLModel's relationship attributes to allow us return this data, and we've also looked at how we can serialize it to be returned when retrieving it from our API paths. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It doesn't really cost anything, and it's the best way you can actually help me to create more content. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.